Fishermen are perhaps the last true hunter-gatherers. They live by their wits, their unrelenting hard labour and hard-won experience. Their lives are spent in tossing boats out on the open sea. Their hours are not determined by a ticking clock, but by the seasons of the year, the vagaries of the weather, and the habits of his prey. Theirs is a life of unbounded independence, which many might envy, but few would be prepared to share. Crays especially love the shallow inshore waters with their camouflaging kelps and other flora, as attractive in their own way as the colourful coral reefs in tropical waters. Below 20 metres, the kelp gives way to sponge gardens, and deeper still to limestone bottoms supporting a variety of corals and sponges. Crays don't like a sandy bottom, for it provides no cover. Unfortunately for the fishermen, the seabed is mostly sand and mud. Up till the 1950s, rocky bottom was found, using the centuries-old method of casting the sounding lead.
The lead line would be, I suppose it would be 2.5 pounds, 3 pounds, I suppose. A cylinder, 2 inches across, about a foot long, hollow in the bottom. Lead, all lead, hollow in the bottom, and you fill the bottom of that lead line with soap. And you threw it down, and when it come up, if you was on sandy bottom, it'd have pure sand on it. But if it come up marked on the edges of the folded out lead, you know this is hard rocky bottom, and that's what you used to go for.
Echo sounders, which were developed by the Navy during World War II, found their way into fishing boats in the mid-1950s. By showing a graph of the seabed, they made the search for the rocky bottom much quicker and easier. Today, most of our crayfish are exported live to be served in expensive restaurants, principally in Asia. They have become a luxury food item here in Australia, but they were once priced similarly to other fish species. They were common fare for the working class. Even so, domestic consumption in and around Hobart was limited. They were part of a multi-species fishery, which included trumpeter, flathead and barracuda caught in Storm Bay and the lower east coast. There were a few larger operators who fished the Bass Strait Islands and upper east and west coasts, targeting the larger and more lucrative Melbourne market. These tended to be larger sailing vessels up to 60 feet and more. They worked their cray pots from large motor dinghies up to 20 feet in length. One of these vessels, and the prettiest of them all, is the Julie Burgess, restored and preserved at Devonport as the last representative of her type. The prices received for crayfish rose dramatically during the late 1940s and early 50s, when an export market for frozen craytails into the US was established. For the first time, crayfish could be caught in abundance without flooding the market and depressing prices. The 1950s were boom years for the fishery. The sky was the limit. Crayfish reached the heady price of 22 cents a kilo, and entry into the fishery equalled only 50 kilos of crayfish.
We could do anything then for £5 a year. That was our licence charges, £5 a year.
Today, a stake in the fishery is out of the reach of most young fishermen. Some of the best fishing is to be found close inshore among rocks and reefs. This requires the use of a dinghy, it being too dangerous to venture by boat. For over 100 years, wooden dinghies fitted the purpose.
First started off with wooden dinghies and inboard motors. Now, in those days, some didn't have a clutch on them. We used paddles. Most of the dinghy blokes in those days, wooden dinghies, we used paddles. Now, it was really good to get right on the spot where you wanted to go and put a pot right there. But we were very much aware of the noise with shallow water with crayfish. And then the outboards come along.
Bill Dennis was the first on the west coast to use aluminium dinghies with outboard motors. Robert Clifford quickly saw their potential.
But it made such a huge difference. It meant that we were much faster, get further away from the boat, and get more work done in a day. The boats were very stable. They were quite heavy aluminium dinghies, and we could have a fair bit of power on the back. But doing 15, 20 knots was perfectly capable, and which meant that you were literally going 3 or 4 times as far away as they could go with the wooden dinghy. So yes, it did. The wooden dinghy was okay, but the aluminium dinghy was much more efficient.
During the 1960s, new fishing grounds were still being discovered, both offshore and inshore.
Gary, my first professional dinghy trip was on the Burn Ganna with Billy Dennis. Now, Dennis was a good man. He wasn't no chicken. He didn't fool round too much. Bill, when he gave orders, that's what he meant. And we knew that he meant it. So I went on the Burn Ganna. The Burn Ganna used to race with the barges to the old May Queen and stuff in Hobart. She was about a 65-footer. We had a wood stove on board, and and an old cast iron kettle. And Bill had purchased 2 new dinghies, these aluminium dinghies, and put on the Burn Ganna. They went on the port side, one behind the other, in front of the wheelhouse, up towards the mast. And we also had a pot making stand down in the storeroom in the Burn Ganna, so that if we lost a pot, we could make pots. We used to make them on board. And I think she had about 38, 40 pots at the time. And we went around the coast and up past Low Rocky. It looked good, and high cliffs and everything, and no beaches, trees, rocks. And we came up around into the bottom side of Christmas Cove, the corner of the bottom side, and we tossed the anchor over there. There was no kelp like there was where we'd been used to working the string kelp. String kelp grows in 10 fathoms and under, and the kelp forest at the bottom end of Bruny and down along the western shore to research and that, Gary, and my word, I tell you, it was a whole different ball game, and we had the gear baited up, and they weren't big pots, not like today's standard, but we had our first shot there, and we got 43 score for the first shot, and I mean they were crayfish. And there was just as many on the outside of the pots as what there was on the inside, Gary. And we used to get them and put them in bags, these crays in a bag, pull a pot, get 4 or 5 jockeys off the side of the thing, and then put them in bags. And we had bags of crayfish. We'd pull 3 or 4 pots and run back to the boat, put them in the tank, race back again, Pull another 4 or 5 pots, bait them up, put them in, take another load of crayfish back. And we ended up with 43 score for the shot. And there were crayfish everywhere, and I mean, they were decent-sized crayfish, Gary. I mean, when we had a ton of crayfish our first shot, and there was crayfish. I'd never seen crayfish like the thing, It was virgin dinghy bottom.
Before I went on the boat, that'd be 54 or something, Guy Keys on the Patanella mentioned to Dad that you ought to go in the shank, because he said it looks good for dinghy. And later on, when I came on the boat, we did. We went up there. And we had, 10 score shot, 4 shots, 26 pots, and we left it. But yeah, we was the first run of dinghy there, and they were big black fish,
Dinghy fishing is rewarding, exhilarating and dangerous.
If we were going in, and we're talking about acres of shallow bull kelp, like a fathom on it, even less. Because when you've got 2 or 3 fathoms, it's not a problem so much, but real shallow water, the bull kelp's on top, and you'll see these breakers. Now, you can learn to read those too, going in to shoot your gear. Because when you get through the breakers and shoot your gear, it's not a problem, because the breakers are out there. Not all the places we shoot the dinghy, it's deep gutters and little bays where it's sheltered. But out wide as you come in, you'll come through the breakers and you learn to dodge them and you learn to read them. Sometimes they're a big lazy swell. Now the real big lazy ones, Gary, you've got time because they're not travelling real fast. But the ones that travel fast is harder than the ones that's going slow naturally. So you learn to read where they're going to break and how they're going to break.
So you've got to have in the dinghy a good deckhand. You want a good deckhand. So if you're up in the Gulch Way and the breaker happens to be coming, you say up the front, and he's on the front and with the bow line or grabbing hold of the rail, the splash rail, to get weight out the back of the dinghy, so you'll go up through the breaker or down the other side. You with me? And you've got to be 200% with it, Gary. It's no good to go on there if you are pickled.
When we work in a cray dinghy, or inshore with a cray dinghy, you live with the breakers. I mean, I've been fishing 56 years. You live with them. You live with them, you know. You can come unstuck too, but no, not really, because you make sure you don't.
Now, when it's flat calm, it's good, beautiful. You look down through the viewer, you see the trumpeter and stuff, and nature, you see nature all together. The cray grass and stuff, because you're only working in 1 or 2 or 3 fathoms, and the cray grass moving up, and you'll see a line of abalone down the side of a rock, and it'll move back that way, and then over under this shoulder you might see cray horns poking out. You with me? And you'll place your pot right there, and I've been winding up the rope and seen the crays coming out and going down the pot while I'm still tying the rope off, and not being slow either.
A lamentable number of men have lost their lives dinghy fishing, and a greater number have been tipped out and lived to tell the tale.
The old guys would always tell you never to have a night shot, etc., because it's too dangerous and the sea could make overnight and you would lose your pots. Contrary to that, though, we found that was the best time to catch the fish too. So we took a few risks, and I took a lot of risks. I don't ever remember capsizing the wooden dinghy, but in later years I lost a few fish by capsizing the dinghy and having to swim back ashore. We never lost any people, fortunately, and of course we never wore life jackets either. We didn't think about things like that. But I lost 5 score of crays once, which was a big lesson. If you got 5 score of crays in the bottom of your boat, tipping them back in again wasn't much fun. On the west coast, of course, the sea is never constant. Even on a good day, every now and again a bigger one comes in, particularly when the sea's making. And sometimes a little spot that doesn't look risky, with just a little bit more sea and perhaps the tide making or dropping, and in the end of the day you do find that the wave might have been 3 times bigger than you expected, and occasionally we got caught. And 9 times out of 10 you get away with it, but every now and again you wouldn't. On one occasion we were caught side onto the wave. The wave just broke unexpectedly, and another occasion we were running with a full load of crayfish and in the bottom of the boat, almost back to the boat actually, only a quarter of a mile away from the boat, and got pooped, and that was it. We had to swim back to the boat.
Maury Wolfe was also tipped out of the dinghy on one occasion.
There was this wave coming. I said, chuck that boy over, Butch. Get the boy over quick. And because we'd pulled a certain amount in, and he trod on the rope, and I got tangled around his foot. I said, throw it, Butch, throw it. And I've got the dinghy coming around, throw it. And it was still stuck in his foot. The next minute, up in the air she went and tipped over. Well, that was the only time I've ever been out of a dinghy, Gary, and it's the only time I want to be out of the dinghy too, mind you. And I got off this bull kelp and it ripped me away, and I got off it again and I slipped up this rock and I held on and clawed my way up the rock, and I had my wet with trousers on, no life jackets, and nobody wore a life jacket.
Meanwhile, the big boat, not anchored, is drifting towards the rocks.
The wind was in and Butchie's out on the rock calling out, "The boat, Maury, the boat." And I said, I can't help the boat, you know. And the wind was in, Gary. And the boat's not all that far off the rock either, mind you. The mast, you could see it, the wheelhouse, in the gap of the rock, but the mast was up above the rock, you know. And I guessed it was probably only 15 to 20 feet away from this rock coming in, Gary. However, I said, God, you've got to help me. I need you to help me. And something said to me, don't worry about the boat, just get the dinghy going. You work on this and let me fix the boat. And with that, Gary, as true as I live, a warm breeze came out past me like this and warmed me and went out and pushed the boat off the rocks. Just one of those experiences, you never ever forget it, Gary. Because when I was under the water, I saw my mother, I saw my father, I saw all of my brothers. I got 7 brothers, I saw all them. I saw my wife and my children, and I saw my life story in that time that I was under the water. That's what I saw. And I tell you what, Gary, it shook the boots off me. It changed me. As a changed man.
Fishermen operated from major ports and minor ports, and any nook or cranny in the coastline which gave them access to good fishing. The further from the crowd, the better. To save 8 hours travelling from Stanley, Max Hardy could see the potential in setting up a shore base at Temma, which had once been the loading port for the Balfour mine. Others were to follow his example.
How I got started at Temma was when I was fishing Sandy Cape and up and down there with the Rona H, I used to always even poke into Temma Harbour, and the Rona H was a little bit too deep and too big to be in Temma Harbour. So then again, I had the bright idea, if I had about a 30-footer, a good boat, and a slipway, I could pull it out of the water at Temma Harbour. I got Dean Wilson and built a 30-footer, which I named the Jennifer Hardy, and I built her a tri-bunner. And I settled her into Temma Harbour, and we used to pull the boat right up to the shack door. And then it worked really well.
In the late 1940s, Bern Cuthbertson Sr., along with Bern Cuthbertson Jr., established a fishing station in Fortescue Bay.
And the jetty was built first, and that was about 1947, and then up went the freezer, and the old mill had just closed down over in Fortescue, just along from the beach, and the old man bought 2 or 3 of the old millers' huts there, and bought one which he left there, and all the others, 3 others were brought over and set up with the freezers. So there was a box making, or shed and engine room and everything that was required. And we used to catch a lot of mackerel in Walker's Creek. We had a shop there one morning, actually at 10 in the morning. It was only a small beach seine, and a 10 tonne for a shot. I reckon 20 tonnes went out over the top of the net. But it was a success. Finished up, Dad's older brother Alf Cuthbertson, the boat builder at Montague Bay, the old man had him build 3 26-foot motor dinghies, which had a little 4-cylinder petrol engine in them, and one worked out of where the jetty was still standing from the old timber mill, and Bill Ritchie was one of the most important ones there. He worked from the old timber mill, and the other 2 worked out of what we called then Walker's Creek. It's now known as Canoe Creek, where they've put the old William Pitt ashore there.
The most outlandish place that one can imagine for a shore base is George's Rocks in Banks Strait, where the Pike brothers set up camp in 1946. It was to provide its own unique set of challenges.
Oh, well, we were pretty ignorant of what we were about to venture into, I think. We always loved the sea, but we just didn't realise what it was going to be like to get all the gear ready, make the pots, set off with their stores up to George's Rocks and catch the fish and take them back to the coffs. We had to make a lot of coffs to keep them in up there because we didn't have well in the boat. So we'd work all day and get back up to George's just on dark and transfer all the fish into the coffs. After doing that for a week and getting a load, we'd have to pull the coffs up on the beach, on this big gravelly, hard beach, and just ease them up as we got the fish out of them, so we could get them up a bit further and get wet through in the process, and fill these bags up and and then load them into a little dinghy and row them out to the boat and then lift them up the side and put them on the deck and then hopefully get over the bar when we came home. And it was a real hassle. It was a nightmare really for start, but we soon got used to it.
The Pikes camped ashore in this old shack.
We could never find out who actually built it, but it was definitely there when we got there, just empty, so we took use of it. It was very, very handy when we got held in there with the weather and couldn't do anything. We camped up in the shack and lived on mutton bird eggs and a few bunny rabbits there. As we had no freezers or anything in those days, no radios, no phones.
A fisherman is by definition an independent and resourceful fellow. He needs to be a mechanic and an electrician, a navigator, a radio operator, and much more. He usually has scant respect for authority, hates paperwork, and will barely tolerate marine surveyors. He will have definite views on how the fishery should be managed, which will always differ from those of the department. He will talk about the good years when catches and prices were better and lament the present situation. Skills in cooking and psychology are a benefit, for he shares cramped quarters with one or two others who might have a completely different worldview to his own. These he endeavours to tolerate in the interests of harmony. If he is jealous of his neighbour's success, he will never admit it. When there's trouble at sea, he won't hesitate to help, be it friend or foe. He is becoming more careful with the disposal of plastics at sea, and with the notable exception of seals, which he considers vermin, he has generally kept in step with modern thinking on the protection of endangered species. But it wasn't always so. Before there was frozen packaged craybait, catching bait was always a problem. A variety of fish, sharks, birds and mammals were used for bait, the taking of which would be frowned on today, especially dolphins, which the fishermen knew as porpoises.
I mean, you'd see acres, wouldn't you? I mean, it was up the Sloop Rocks there once, and as far as you can see was porpoises, all around you, as far as you can see. And we'd just shoot a few and one would float. So, yeah. But we didn't do that much. Penguins was good bait. We'd go ashore of a night. We'd be, we'd finish at 10 o'clock of the night, and we'd have some tea, and then we'd wait for them to start coming ashore. Then we'd go ashore with a torch, and I had a special waddies made up, you know, that was what we collected ashore. The stick with a knob on it. And we'd tear around and knock them on the head and bag them up. And if you wanted to keep them for a few days, you caught them alive. Didn't hurt them that much and kept them in the well.
We've used plenty of shags. I think they're a protected species now. We used to shoot them. And especially places like the Hummock Island, that you shoot a net and you come around next morning and blooming things full of penguins. So they were good bait, but that didn't happen very often. But.
So as we cleaned one of the islands out, you couldn't get a penguin. Now, you go back there, the island's full of penguins, so yeah.
Tasmania lies directly in the path of the Roaring Forties. These wild west winds which circle the Southern Ocean and build up tremendous seas. As wild as the weather can be, comparatively few vessels have been lost in the open ocean through stress of weather. This is not to say that a lot of fishermen haven't found themselves at sea in conditions rather not have experienced.
This one night when we had the old wooden dinghies, and they were heavy, and the lee runner was only little, they were heavy dinghies, and we were getting down off, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We got down off Shoemaker, which is halfway between South Cape and Big Witch, Matt, and it was pretty bad. And the old man didn't really think that we could get her up into the wind to get the sail off, because we had a gaff sail in them days before we put the Marconi on. So, and there was a big discussion. Well, we tried to hang in, because the way would have come, we would have lost the dinghy. We was only worried about losing the dinghy money. and the damn leech ropes let go on the gaff. So that was all right. We got the sail down, didn't we? So next morning in research, the ropes and pots all over the deck, and here's the old gaff laying there and the boom and that. So God was on our side.
In November 1963, Des Wayman, in the 50-foot Nairi, found himself sheltering from a gale in the lee of Matsyka Island, in company with the 42-foot Lee Ann, Arthur Renard, master.
We're laying under Matsyka, where you lay at the gap there at Matsyka, and all through the night the wind came through. And I've never seen a sea or a wind build like it. It was quick. We decided to leave, and when we got out there, we weren't having such a hell of a lot of trouble. It wasn't much water, no water coming aboard, just an odd one breaking, but they were the longest swells I'd ever seen. And they gave 12 metre swell at Matsyka and forced 12. Anyway, we left and we got out, and I toddling along, and a young bloke said, "Look at this big sea," to me. I looked behind, and there was the Leanne skidding down the sea. I reckon she was doing 40 odd knots as she came down that sea.
I'm not sure whether it was him or me, whichever one it was, said, "Look at this bastard coming." And it was honestly, it was just one big wall of water. But when I can remember it hitting, that's all. But I think the boat was in the trough. I think the Leanne was down in the trough, and this freak wave sort of come and hit it. Well, it had no chance, but in my opinion, it rolled straight over.
Dipped her head under and turned over and went out of sight with the gardener.
Well, if the wheelhouse door had been on the weathered side as we rolled, we would have been still in the wheelhouse today. But as the boat rolled and the wheelhouse door was open, and it was on the weathered side, on the sheltered side, well, it threw me straight out through the door, and I bumped my head on something. I don't know what it was, and split my head open. But next thing, I was just in a mass of water. It'd be dark all of a sudden, and then it'd come light. Well, that'd be the wave breaking over you, and then, you know, you'd take a sort of, well, I must have took a good breath to last a few seconds. And I remember being in the water, and I'd bought a new Holden car, and there's three things that crossed my mind, and that I still remember it today. I thought, am I going to drive my new car? Will I ever have another beer, or will I see my parents again? That's exactly what happened.
So I went back, and the sad part about it was Arthur was alive, and he waved to me, and he was amongst all the gear. And as I went round, Barry popped up alongside of me, Barry Bosworth, and I couldn't say, "I'm going over to get him, I'm going to leave you here." So we grabbed him.
They pulled me aboard, and I just laid there, and I don't know how many gallons of water I brought up, but I don't know how many minutes, I thought it was a day that I was in the water.
And I declare that we wouldn't have been 3 minutes doing a lot of it. Went straight over to Arthur, he was there, and we thought, oh, he's still alive. He was lying on his back.
Sadly, Arthur Renard was deceased when brought aboard, one of the many, many people who have lost their lives on this wild and rugged coast. There are numerous anchorages on the south coast of Tasmania, but unfortunately, all these are open to gales from the south.
I got caught in New Harbour once with the Gazelle. It was the day that the Leanne sunk off Matsyka, and we actually busted the anchor chain in Gazelle. We lost the anchor. I got most of the chain back, but I'd lost the two anchors that were on the end of it, trying to hold her. And so we set out to sea, but with the news coming over the radio that the Leanne was lost, we eventually turned back as well. We had only got a mile or so out of New Harbour and half an hour of steaming. We're going up and down in one spot. So I eventually went back into New Harbour, intended then to beach her if I had to, because it just wasn't, we were going to lose her if we went to sea. So we improvised. We had to cut up a couple of 44-gallon drums that we had on deck. We passed the chain through that and anchored again with the drums as anchors, and rode the night out with the engine running. Fortunately, the weather moderated the next day, and the day after that we had quite a battle to get the drums off the bottom again because they'd filled with sand, and they turned out to be quite good anchors.
Two fundamentals encountered in the hunt for crayfish combine to ensure it can be a dangerous occupation. The first of these is that the best fishing is found inshore, among rocks and bullies. The second is that the weather can be rough and unreliable. The result is that fishermen are often pushing the odds between good catches and maintaining a safe operation. An unknown number of boats and lives have been lost due to this lethal combination. In contrast to the inshore boats, there are a few operators who specialise in offshore crayfishing. Using larger boats and working to depths of up to 150 metres, often out of sight of land, they work virtually all weather. Their business model is designed around catching larger volumes of a lower value product, as the paler deep water cray does not attract the price that the red inshore crays enjoy.
Port Davey is the only all-weather anchorage between Recherche Bay and Strahan. In spite of its title, it is a port without roads and no permanent residents. It is a wilderness and place of refuge for boats working the southwest. However, there are a host of fine weather anchorages for those with local knowledge. These could provide some unpleasant surprises if the sea made up unexpectedly, as this amazing photo of the Eastern Star, anchored at a place known as the Shank, amply testifies.
We call them anchorages. They're just stopovers for the night. They're not anchorages as such until you get up to Macquarie Harbour. Even the main Wirran Inlet. We had one bad night there with Dad. Because you used to try to stick there in them days. I don't know, we don't do it so much now. We were putting lines ashore to stop it from charging around, because if you charge around, you're going to foul the anchor, aren't you? So you've got to stop it from, the swell takes you backwards and forwards in the river mouth there. And so you've got to stop fouling the anchor. There's quite a few boats had a bit of fun with that.
Point Hibbs offers shelter in almost all weathers, but this is achieved only by shifting anchorage from the southern side to the north side when the wind shifts from northwest to southwest with the passage of the front. Not a pleasant proposition in a gale.
Some of the worst episodes on that west coast from most people's point of view is shifting from the bottom side of Point Hibbs when it swings into the southwestern southerly to go round to the top side. But we always knew when to go. Billy Dennis, who I considered was probably one of the best seamen I've ever seen in my life, as soon as he started, you'd hear his chain starting to wind up, we'd all up with our chains. And it looked like a Portuguese navy going out round the point. Everyone would shift. Yes. Billy knew exactly when to shift.
Bicheno, situated on the east coast of Tasmania, was a whaling station in the early days, but more recently a fishing port. Shelter for small boats was found in the gulch between Governor Island and the mainland, but that was up until the Great Gale of June 1972, which wrecked so many boats. Larger vessels now lay to moorings in the bay without shelter from gales from the northeast, which can have its consequences. Wally Oliver was forced to watch his beautiful Wave Crest drag her moorings ashore in 2009.
We're blowing 50 or 60 knots, I suppose, northwest. I thought it would abate, but it was a long time, and Wave Crest dragged her mooring, and it was so angry we couldn't get on her. Righto, don't. And although a couple of the young fellas wanted to, I couldn't really authorise that because I wouldn't have been able to handle it if somebody got killed over it. It took her several hours to drag in from a moored position. She came tail first onto the rocks in the bay, and of course bashed her tail till she sprung all the seams, and then she leaked so badly she just sunk. But righto, don't. But something got jammed in the pritchel pipe or chain pipe up forward, the mattress off the bed, I think, and it made her more or less airtight up forward, and she was high at the head, and that caused more damage because the stern of her was pointing towards the shore and actually on the rocks, and that's what bashed the tail out of it. Well, we had plenty of spectators and afterwards plenty of advice, but people at the town were terrific with me. Right, don't. Probably a dozen or 20 women gave me a hug and all that sort of thing. I've never been so popular with women, but it was a very humbling experience, actually.
Only a few Tasmanian ports have bar entrances, of which Strahan is one. Bridport is another. But the St Helens Bar is the most notorious, as the Pike brothers were to learn early in their fishing career when they owned an old boat named the DJV.
Went down, we could hear the sea roaring, but it was a bit deceptive sometimes. Anyway, we went down, there was a little boat in front of us towing a dinghy. And it didn't look too bad, the bar, and he went out over it, no worries, and we thought, oh yeah, it's all right. Well, we got out there, about 5 in a row coming, too late to turn around, we couldn't do anything, we just had to keep going. And the first one hit her, wasn't too bad, and my brother was out on the deck, and I said, hang on to something, here comes a big one, and he wrapped his arms around the mast, and the next one hit her, and I just lost him. He was in green water, and we had the motorboat on the deck, and when the water cleared, got back up into the bay and had a look, and all the pots just stack them on edge from the bow back to the wheeler. They were all as flat as dinner plates. You could pick them up and throw them. Not one of them was any good, and the one on the front of the dinghy was wrapped around the front of the dinghy. You never saw anything like it. And I thought, well, that's power water. You can't believe what power it's got. I mean, we've been out of there 1,000 times and just missed it. But if you get there right when that's just falling, you've got no hope. Especially if you're doing any speed, you've got to take the speed right off it.
When the swell makes up, the approaches to Curry Harbour on King Island are best negotiated with local knowledge. This skipper, approaching the harbour from the south using the inside passage, underestimated the speed which the groundswell was building. Fortunately, being a former surfer, he was able to find a rip which allowed him to navigate his way between the breakers to open water. The fisherman's job satisfaction is governed by weather more than any other profession. Many days are spent at sea in miserable conditions, with wind-driven salt spray driving across a heaving deck. Storms at sea are sooner or later followed by periods of fair weather, ideal for fishing. This is the money time. A week or two of fine weather and a little luck can pay a lot of bills. These are the good times. As one enthusiast put it, crayfishing is like Christmas every day. You just don't know what goodies are going to be in the next pot. Light to moderate winds in summer allow fishermen to operate efficiently. These often give way to extended periods of glassy calm in autumn and early winter, which are a delight to experience. The Tasmanian fishermen often work against a backdrop of rugged beauty equal to anywhere in the world. It's appreciated by some and ignored by others. But up till the 1940s, all pots were pulled by hand.
You'd be pulling through that tip kelp with coyo ropes and your hands would be bleeding, but stop no way. You'd keep going, you'd wrap your hands up, and it was absolute sheer toil. You wouldn't do it to your worst enemy now. No gloves? No, I never heard them. No. No, I remember my brother-in-law, Murray Hutchison, and he worked with my brother. And he came up there one day. He'd been home for a while. I wondered what was wrong with him. You get up there and he's got this pipe davit hanging over the side and a pulley on it. I said, "What's that?" And he said, "That's my new pot hauler." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Oh," he said, "come and have a look, save a lot of work." So he goes over and got a pot in this thick kelp and he puts it on this hauler. And he's got a motorbike clutch, he rigged up a motorbike clutch running off the main engine, or car engine. Puts her into gear and the pot starts coming up, and the next thing the kelp stops it dead and the pipe bends down against the side of the boat. And we laugh, because he hadn't put any gussets in the centre of her or anything underneath her. Back he goes, puts a gusset on and comes back. And that was the first hauler I know of in Tasmania, first pot hauler. Didn't take us long to get one on after that.
Yeah, pulling pots by hand was hard, because after 2 days, and the old man wouldn't have a pilot on the boat or nothing like that. We steered the boat, we took the boat, and I couldn't touch the steering wheel. You had to use the palm of your hand, because Arston handling, what did we get, 40 score a day, 4 shots a day? And the pus used to come out of my fingernails. Real sore. No gloves. So, but later on in life things changed. But that was just the early time.
The dinghy fisherman still hauls his pots by hand. But the use of gloves nowadays is universal.
Oh, you're right, Pete. Got 2 or 3 nice ones in there.
The traditional Tasmanian cray pot is both aesthetic and functional. Their design goes back hundreds of years and to the lobstering coasts of Cornwall. Used in Victoria since the 1850s, they were not legalised in Tasmania till 1927, being deemed too efficient and therefore a threat to stocks. There was a time when most fishermen made their own. But nowadays, most are made by specialist pot makers like Kerry Leal of Smithburn. The sticks used are horizontal, or various types of tea tree selected for their durability.
Have a look at the leaf on it. It's a pointy leaf. This one here is a different tea tree altogether. He's called squarosa. When you look down the ends, they make a square when you get them properly. That won't run at all. It's carrot wood, so it breaks really easy, whereas this one, when it's steamed, it'll bend really good. Depending on the length of the stick, it can take between a dozen to 15, 20 to build a pot. First up, we steam the sticks. That's to make them pliable so they'll bend. If you try and run them green, they just splinter. They break all the time. Right, that's better. Now we can get him started. Okay, let's see how we go here. Yep, no worries. This stick, he's going to bend all right. Sometimes they get little knots where they've had branches and they break. Every crayfisherman wants something different. That's why we've got 5 or 6 different moulds, different shapes, different sizes. Everyone has their own idea of what's the best pot. Little boats prefer little pots, big boats prefer big pots, probably because of the room.
Dean Wilson built the Cindy for me. She was 80 feet. We discovered those crayfish out on the continental shelf. And gee, let's give you some idea. One haul there, 15 bags, 1,500 pound bags in one shot for 40 pots. That's what we used to do. We had that for about 12 months. We had that more or less to ourselves out there on the shelf because no one knew where we were going to get the crayfish, but it didn't take them long to wake up.
Bern Cuthbertson had his best days fishing in 1952, about 7 or 8 miles north of Port Davey.
There were 4 of us on board, so 2 one was emptying pots and the other one was baiting them, and those days we had to have a man on the hauler. There was no automatic coilers those days, and Bill and I'd take turns at the wheel, and we realised we were on virgin country as soon as we started because the pots were just chock-a-block, and we reckon we got about 5 score riding the pots up the jockeys. And we finished up having 3.5 shots, so that was 48 pots a shot. So anyway, by 7 o'clock that night, we already had 20 score in the tanks that we got off Southwest Cape. And the wind had come southeast, is what sent us up there. And by 7 o'clock, we'd had another 101.5 score, which is 203 dozen on board, and we got underway to come back to Hobart, and it was the most exciting day I ever had. It was just flat out all the time, and we didn't even get time to talk to one another. It was just go, 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 because we had plenty of bait on board. We used to catch dolphins and cooter those days, a bit of shark, and we were back in Hobart the next morning.
Bern's 101 score probably weighted in at 17 or 1800 kilo. Bern actually topped that with a trip to Pedro Blanca when he caught 4 ton in 2 days. However, as crays were sold by the score, a load of smaller fish paid much better than a load of bigs. A normal's 20, just as there are 12 to a dozen. But there are 24 to the Tasmanian fisherman's score, a curiosity which dates back to when crayfish were sold by the count rather than weight. The fishmonger required an extra 4 fish to compensate for any that may be dead.
We were fishing in an area south of Margot's Harbour. We finished up calling it Tiger Corner. All our family know it as Tiger Corner now. And my friend, one of the chaps was back on the boat, Merv Smith was back on the boat cooking breakfast, and we were real early in the morning getting our pots, and there was a big sandbank, a big sand dune just there. And there were some birds floating around the water, seagulls and things there. And I happened to look ashore, and so did my mate at the same time. We didn't look at one another for a while. I thought, am I going silly? Down the bank came this tiger, striped, with his tail hitting the sand. He sort of dragged his tail a little bit. My mate said to me, "Did you see what I saw?" I said, I wasn't going to ask you in case you thought I was going silly. He said, "That's a Tasmanian tiger." So we did see one. So what we done, just to make sure, we got our mate and we told him, when was cooking the breakfast, we said, "We'll come round here and we'll show you something." He went back, and there was the footmarks of the Tasmanian tiger. And when they do, you go on at the bank, his tail was hitting the ground. And you can see the mark where his tail hit the ground, and the footmarks one behind the other.
I've seen a lot of things happen at sea. I can't really think of any specific thing at sea apart from helping people that have been in trouble. Boats ashore, we've got them off, and different things like that. I've seen a lot of red algae on the water down the bottom end here once, from South Cape to South West Cape. Red, orange, milky looking rubbish. I've only seen it twice in my life. I've seen several moon bows, like the big white bow at midnight, just like a rainbow, only the white. I've seen possibly half a dozen or more of those at sea. Beautiful sunsets, shooting stars and different things like that, but not, and Aurora Australis and things, but as far as, I mean, I've seen whales ashore, Gary, strandings. I've seen, I guess one of the greatest things I did see at sea once as we were coming home with the Charmaine J, and off Port Davey there was this cloud of birds coming up the shore, and we were going south, like to go to South West Cape and then east to home, to South Cape. But we run into a pot of porpoises there, Gary, and I don't know how many millions there would have been. But the bird life, just the bird life, you'd thought it was a good breeze coming, the water was breaking. And we travelled from just north of Port Davey, the Coffee Pot Rock, is where we run into that pot of dolphins and birds, and we went south from there a couple more hours around South West Cape. We travelled east of there to South Cape and then around South East Cape, and we come to Whales Head and squared up the runaway to the Actines, and they were still coming.
Tasmania, with her sheltered waterways and abundance of long, straight timber, has been a boat builder's paradise.
We had to get a keel first, and we got old Sidney Brooks was the bushman, and he took me out in the bush between Smithton and Marrawah, and we selected a tree that would cut the keel. It had to be 78 foot long, 15 by 15, free of heart and sap. And we selected the tree, and he was a real character, old Sidney, but he lived in the bush all his life. But I'm following along behind him, and he said, "My word," he said, "we got to find a big tree for this, get this size timber out of it." And I'm saying, "Yes, I've got to, yes, I understand, Sidney." And he said, "Yes," he said, "when we find the tree," he said, "she's going to be high." He said, "You'll look up to it as far as you can." He said, "and then I'll have to take over and look the height of it." He said, "It'll be that high." But we got everything out of that tree, the keel, the stem, and the full-length stringers in an 80-foot boat.
For nigh on 200 years, timber fishing boats were built anywhere and everywhere. They were built in shipyards and backyards, in paddocks and sheds, and by rivers and creeks. They were built by experts and amateurs, by sawmillers and farmers. There were fishermen who built boats.
I think I built about 14 down there altogether.
There were boat builders who went fishing.
I always wanted to go fishing, but Dad said I had to learn a trade first.
Finely crafted vessels were created with the most basic of tools. They were not designed with the aid of computers, nor even on paper. In fact, no drawings or calculations existed. They were developed from a half model carved by the builder using long experience and a keen eye.
What I've generally done, they've just come to me and told me the size of the boat they wanted, the beam and the draft, and I've made a model to suit, and it's sort of worked out.
Boat building skills were learned quickly and on the job, with little ceremony and a minimum of instruction.
Like the planking, I said, oh geez, I said, that's pretty technical stuff. And he showed me one or two, and then okay, it was all right from there on. You had to cut the camber and the cork and seam in it and everything like that.
Bernard Wilson has been both a boat builder and a fisherman. With 18 substantial boats to his credit, the largest being the 70-foot Susan's Pride. He is the most experienced wooden boat builder in Tasmania today.
Yes, I've built my last boat. Yes, the memories. I've had her about 14-year-old, I'd say.
And what do you use it for?
Just to go out and catch a flathead or a cray and take the grandkids out. And every second year we go to the Wooden Boat Festival in Hobart to have a look at the boats and see what's about, and the grandkids love it. They stay on the boat. And that's better than Christmas, the young one said.
When Bernard finally reaches the boat builder's heaven, a place stacked high with great lengths of dry timber free of heart and sap, and where the clients don't interfere, he will be long remembered for his staunch and capable vessels, which will still be earning their living off the wild coasts of old Tasmania. And the boat builder's arts and traditions will continue to be celebrated in the Australian Wooden Boat Festival held in Hobart every 2nd February.
I've charted right around Tasmania with people from Sydney and that, and I take them into some of these gulches and set a cray pot, and they just cannot believe. They cannot believe the beauty of the bottom. You know, in the afternoon with the sun setting in the golden west along a shoreline or around a rocky headland, it is absolutely, look, it's not the promised land, Gary, but it's near enough to it till we get there.
Actually, the highlight of it, and the part I loved most, was my family used to go with me. Now, when they could come away on the holidays, if I could have done that all my life, I would have done that.
I think those fishing years were good. They taught me a lot. They taught me how to run a small business. They taught me how to be a mechanic. They taught me how to be a boat builder. They taught me everything that you need to know to run a small business, and so I think it was very good. I quite enjoyed it in the early days, but then I put my attention to other things.
We were away up to 20 days sometimes, especially when we were around the West Coast. And we had 10 children. The wife had to do all the hard yakka there, looking after the kids and trying to keep them in control. Imagine what it was like for them, but they did it, and they did it willingly. Yeah, so yeah, they did a marvellous job, no doubt about that.
Hard on the family, really hard, but I wouldn't do anything else. But by the same token, when I was going to school this high, I only wanted to go fishing. I used to pinch the dinghies off the beach and go fishing. Geez, I used to get in trouble. I used to go fishing. That's all I wanted to do.